So what do you say to people who are maybe still kind of like skeptical or sitting on the fence about the whole secret space program genre?
Yeah, totally.
What would you say to them?
Yeah, what do we say to them? I totally get it. I didn't believe, I mean, this stuff is so, it's normal to not believe this. I mean, look at what we're talking about, cyborgs and clones and other beings in the outer part of the solar system and slave trade. I mean, it's insane. It's totally insane. What would I say to them? Thank you for being open and minded enough to listen to this. Yeah, I know it's hard. It doesn't make sense to the linear mind, but also I'd say if you can look at it from a more multidimensional perspective and a more quantum perspective and a perspective that isn't so like centered on Terra and humans, that it might begin to make more sense. But I do appreciate anybody who watches this and is even the slightest bit open to this possibility in our solar system and beyond our solar system.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Rose to Exopolitics Today. Rebecca has a remarkable story to tell, and she has some documentation to back that up. So welcome, Rebecca, to the show.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here with you. Yeah.
Well, what really interested me in your story was what you had to say about your father who served with the US Army Signal Corps and then got to spend time with the US Navy and began to work with a aerospace contractor and got a top secret clearance with that. So that really got my attention because his involvement in these black programs was really vital to you being inducted into these programs shortly after your birth in 1972. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your father, his background, service with the Army, Signal Corps, him working with this company, Sanders Associates.
Yeah. Okay. Well, where do we start? Well, my father's military career was not, he wasn't he wasn't a career military guy. He was only in the Signal Corps, I think 6 years, and he was in Vietnam, but he was in communications, not in combat. And I know he had said he got a secret clearance while he was working in Vietnam, but I don't know. We don't have documentation of that. But I don't know that much about, that was before I was born in the 60s. So I don't have that much information about that, but he was vetted directly out of the Army by the company known as Sanders Associates, which later merged with Lockheed. And he worked there for 20 something years with them. And eventually, I think we have record of the top secret clearance coming in 77. And at the same time, I think in 78, 9, 80, he was sent by Sanders into the Navy Reserve, and he was working with naval intelligence at that time. My father died in 2.5 years ago, 2020. And it was only when he was in hospice, and I was with him in hospice day after day, that he started to talk a little bit about his work with what I would call the military industrial complex. And I have to say, I felt quite stupid that I didn't realize he was working in these deep classified projects. And he mentioned CIA and NASA and the alphabet agencies really burned into my brain. I didn't know any of this. He traveled a lot when I was a kid. We weren't ever to ask where he went or what he was doing, who he was with. It was all very under the table. And now I can see so much more in hindsight. He was a guy who was very buttoned up. And as they want guys that are like that, and that I think they train them to be very much, don't ask, don't tell, don't divulge the secrets. And he was an engineer. We could call him an engineer, and I would call him an inventor. He was an inventor. He said in hospice, like, they got a lot of patents out of me. They got a lot of things out of me. And he mentioned, I asked him, because I've received some information psychically that he, had higher help, let's say, to solve some of his work projects. And I said, Dad, do you feel like you might have had maybe, and I meant extraterrestrial help. I said, do you feel like there are other beings helping you with this? And he looked away and he smirked. He looked at the wall and he said, yeah, kinda. I would identify him as a starseed for sure. And I think too, he had contact with the Greys, some kind of involvement with the Zetas that went back, as far as I can tell, into his own childhood. And I want to share with the audience too, that I do work as a seer and a channel. And so for me to have visions and to receive like messages from the multi-dimensional arena is not unusual for me. Just to give a little context when I say I have a vision or this or that. He was enigmatic, and I didn't really begin to understand his history until a month or two before he died.
Well, you did send me a lot of documents that show his military service and his work for this company, Sanders, and that he had these security clearances and working in very secretive projects, I would say. So that's kind of like documented. Now, in 1972, he's working for the Sanders Associates, and he's got a secret clearance, and he's very talented. And it's not all that surprising to me that somehow his children, and you in particular, would come to the attention of a group of extraterrestrials. So, yeah, can you explain what happened in 1976 where you as a 4-year-old were taken by the insectoids, the Greys, and what happened to you?
Yeah, so a lot happened in my 4th year of life. There's so much going on. That was really a pivotal year for me. But I was, long story short, I'll just get to it. I was taken to the moon. I started being abducted at night. I had many, and it wasn't confined to my being 4. This went on for some years, off and on. It wasn't like every night, but I had many, many experiences in childhood of being waking up mute and paralyzed. And I would try very much to, and I was terrified. And very odd things like having my head at the foot of the bed, and my clothes were on weird, and all these things that I see now. I had lots of nosebleeds during this time. Lots of those things are correlated now, I realized from my research, with abduction. Anyway, I was taken to the moon and was working in kind of light duty at what I recognize now as the Dark Fleet base. And I was I know this because it was completely German, Draco, and Greys. And I was interfacing mostly with the Draco. Before this all happened, I had an interaction through my consciousness with a Draco who took me during a time of intense trauma, kind of toured me around through the moon facility, the moon base, and basically was showing me, this is where you're going to be. You're going to be with us, and we will own you. So it was at the time, it was where I was working was within the cloning and experimentation labs. That's kind of what I know about. That was where I was doing stuff. And first it was more like training me telepathically to interface with beings that they were experimenting on, beings that I would say were captives or in their lab. So I was, how do I say this? It was a slow developmental process in which they trained me to, again, interface telepathically with what I would call as benevolent beings I don't even have names for or really understand who they were, where they came from. Many different kinds of beings. And it was almost like because I was a child, I was perfect for befriending the beings. And ultimately, I was to get a snapshot of their DNA, taking that with my mind and then sending it back to a central database. It seemed, it's in a way, not a complex job. But I feel so much like I betrayed. I was forced to betray, these friendships that seem to develop in at least a cursory way with beings I met who were captive there. Yeah, the anomaly here is that this wasn't. I had a long time and back later, 20 and back experience when I was 9. And what I didn't understand about the moon is like, why don't they just keep me up there? Why is there this backy forthy thing? Because I would be the grays and the I remember ant beings being part of the kind of team that would take me out. And I would go to what I call the bus station, like an underground substation of some kind. I still do not know exactly where that was. And from there, I would be, I remember being strapped in around my shoulders into a seat and going to the moon. And this happened, I don't know how many times they brought me there and back. So it was over a period of years.
One of the results of them taking you there was that these intuitive abilities came online. And that's a very common pattern. I know in studying UFO contacts or abductions, that's one of the things that often occurs is that people who are taken, whether by benevolent or by the kind of more enigmatic grays, that their psychic abilities are suddenly turned on and they start to stand out. And so they become valued or sometimes recruited by military corporations who are watching how these people perform. So it seems that you were identified as a 4-year-old as someone having the right genetics, and they were switched on when you were taken up there.
Yeah, well, of note too, that my mother's family is all German, and there's some really dark trauma experiences from her family too. And I think that's, I'm sure that was part of what the selection process was about. I mean, I've described in other interviews and presentations that, I do feel now in hindsight that my parents were breeders for kids for I think my brother was also taken. And I think my father ultimately, when looking back and things I experienced, things I was given psychically and things I knew about him, I think he was also taken at age 9 and not necessarily into a 20 and back, but he was also abducted.
Okay, yeah. So that's a generational.
It totally seems like that. I didn't know anything. Michael, I feel so stupid that, again, I didn't, all this stuff could be right in front of me and I wouldn't have known it. It took me, almost 5 decades to sort this out. So, and I would share too that I was, again, another vision. I could also share this with the audience that a lot of my memory retrieval came through, started to come through deep meditation. And so I haven't done hypnotic regression, but I have, you can change your brainwave state from the beta brainwave state that you and I are in now to, say, at least alpha, or maybe go down into a theta state. And that's where I feel the subconscious mind starts to reveal its contents. That's where I've gotten a lot of information from over time and being patient with that journey. But at one point, several days running, I was given I can't say it as a memory, but a psychic vision that I really didn't want to see. And my father sitting in a conference room with 2 grays, some guys in Navy suits and some guys in business suits. And he was being shoved papers at him and being forced to sign papers or cajoled into signing papers. They were telling him that this is for the betterment of humanity. And to me, this was him signing us away, or at least signing me away. I don't know at what point that happened in the trajectory of my, at what point in my life that happened, but I think there was a conscious agreement that was made, that there was, whether he was of right mind or not at the moment he signed for me, we don't know, but there was a formal agreement made, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that would make sense that he kind of was a party to identifying you and giving permission for this to happen. Now, you were taken to the moon over that period from 1976 to 1981, 1981 when you were recruited into the program, 20 and back. But in that first 5 years, being taken back and forth to the moon. Now, this moon base, can you describe it? I mean, what was the shape?
I don't think I ever saw it externally. I mean, I would come up what my clearest memories are of going to the substation or the bus station, as I describe it, in coming up underground there. But I don't actually remember seeing it from a ship coming in. I wish I had more recall on that. Yeah.
Okay, so then, yeah, go.
Oh, I was just thinking that the memories I have there are mostly of, I remember beings in captivity, and also these very sterilized type of, metal tables, labs, and humans, Germans that seemed to be, there was an automaton quality to some of them, almost like they were, I guess the language that comes is like desouled, maybe, working and doing different experiments and collating data and so on and so forth. And there was a cloning aspect to all this, but I only saw, I didn't see the whole base. I would not have had a reason to see the whole facility. And I was so little that, a lot of my memories are me just having my head down, looking at the ground, trying not to see anything. Again, I think early on, this is my earliest years being taken different places. So,
I recall one of the people I've interviewed, Niara Islay, who actually worked for the Air Force, that she was taken in the early 80s to the moon base. And she described seeing things very similar to what you've described. And she described it as a slave facility, and people were just abused, and just all manner of abuses were ongoing there. It was kind of seemed to be just an ongoing process of traumatizing people, and creating the kind of like split personality, the alter that could be used in the programs.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There was a point at which I was taken for that kind of programming, mind control programming, trauma-based mind control programming, after which I was given, I described some of the more light duties I was given. And after that experience, I was then given a different job, and I had become a little older. And this was actually working at what I could call as a jumpgate to Dulce. So there was a connecting point between the moon and Dulce in the dungeon, as I call it, the deeper, more degraded aspects of the lab and experiments that were the domain and domicile of the Greys. That was actually in Dulce. And I didn't actually know this as I got memories back. And it's like a hell realm. I didn't understand what I was seeing. And this is, or where I was, because the seamlessness of that transition from the moon into Dulce was like me going into my bathroom or my kitchen. It wasn't a complicated thing. But again, I think it seems to me now that they needed a child's frequency to help get cargo through, to operate the gate. They needed something in my, we could call it a childlike innocence, but I think there's also something in the child's biology as it is yet unformed in many ways. It creates more of a fluency with frequency, and it assisted something in the mechanism of the jumpgate technology.
Well, that does coincide with a lot of the Montauk Project witnesses who said that, in the 1970s, up until 1983, that they were testing the jumpgate technology using children. So interesting that you were part of that group that were you were taken to Montauk and also taken to Dulce and to the moon using these jumpgates. And that seems to have been a critical part of this acclimation process for them to get to use these jumpgates eventually for kind of adults and special forces people.
Yeah. And again, it's as I've gone over, I had a few years to begin to process this contextually. I understand so much more in hindsight. Like when memories came up at first, I couldn't put it all together about the whys and wherefores, like why this or why that, or why was I needed to work a technology out there, or I do have a lot more understanding, which has helped me so much. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Sorry, yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So in 1982, you're 9 years old and taken to Great Lakes Naval Station, and you're put through an MK program. So you were then taken to Mars. So you want to explain what happened at the naval station? You being put through the program and then being taken to Mars as part of the 20 impact.
Yes. Yeah. So the biggest takeaway from that naval station, what happened there was the trauma bonding with what we could call as a twin, a psychic twin or a MyLab twin. We were, again, held in cages. Like the caging and captivity theme is really big in the programs, or at least when I was in them. I was bonded with a child who was also my age, not a biological twin, nobody I'd ever met before, but we were bonded together psychically, emotionally, sexually, very young, and in every way made to love each other, but also eventually in their programming made to hurt, harm, and traumatize each other. And such would be our relationship when we were finally sent to Mars together. It's very much, I mentioned this before in interviews and my talks on this, that it's very much the protocols for that, the twinning, are very much taken out of Nazi Germany and also the Illuminati, what I call the Illuminati playbook. And it's very much an act of betraying what you most love and being betrayed by the person you most love. So it's very, it's dark and very insidious. But the point, I think, like on Mars, was to create the two of us being stronger together than we might be as individual units. So we were working psychically together on what I could call as recon missions on Mars at the base there. And I always feel like we could see more together than we could see apart. We were strong as a team. And I think it helped our little unit to become successful. And also I can see that when you love somebody and are so bonded to somebody and in a way can't even tell yourself different, like I couldn't tell the difference between the two of us really. You're going to have a successful mission. They want you to. It's like they're betraying your most human and humane and heart-based, blueprint there, but to the end of having a successful whatever it was we were working on at the moment. So
you're age 9, you've been taken to Mars, and the mantids start working on you to enhance your psychic abilities, and then you're built out to be a psychic super soldier, or sorry, a cyborg super soldier. So can you just explain what happened?
Yeah, exactly. How do we explain this one to your audiences? This is always hard for even me now to wrap my head around. So we could, in simple terms, we could say a human that's built out with AI, but I always say cybernetic, a cybernetic organism, which is part tech. I mean, we were built out chemically, biologically, mechanically, psychically, et cetera, in every way built out. So, and this takes place over time. We had a lot of training, but and also these amendments to physiology that were made. And ultimately, I mean, it's hard even to describe myself as, you're still human. They want to retain your human qualities, your psychic ability, and your ability to some level, think for yourself. That was at least during my time there, it seemed so. But they definitely want to see, in a way, it's a research and development lab. Like they want to see how far they can go with a human. What can we make them do? How far can we go before the system, the biology just is corrupted and it can't be used anymore? Yeah.
Okay, so this is then the beginning of a 20-year program where you're serving with the Mars Defense Force. So is that what it was actually called, the Mars Defense Force? And do you remember anything about who led it and how it was structured?
Yeah. So I know that we were the early parts of this were. I mean, I was eventually shipped off other places, but it was patrolling a base. I mean, it was very mundane in a lot of ways. So we were just making sure that the base was safe. We'd be on foot command or air command I was a pilot, driving a really old clunky craft. But we were just making sure that the base was not being, ambushed, or if there was, we had a lot of interactions with the mantids, who I have a lot of, I actually really respect the mantids and had good interactions with the mantids, but they were our primary, how do I say, we co-opted some of them to work for us as surgeons. And they're very highly gifted with frequencies, technology of frequency. But we were also tasked with trying to get some of their technology, I guess. And they lived underground. They were, to me, they were living in a built out environment that was extremely high level, like nothing I'd ever seen before. And our commanders wanted us to kind of figure out what the technology was, the frequency fence that was surrounding their underground domicile, the architecture underground that was protecting them so well, because they didn't have tech like we think about tech as weapons and craft. They didn't have that stuff, but they were very, very highly advanced. And they were living in this kind of, I remember going in there and having a mission. Dean was there and we've got a small unit together, and our commanders had sent us over to figure out, we were just thinking we were hunting for the mantid, the elders, I've called them, the head of command, let's say the older mantids that held a certain frequency of the whole mantid, seemed to hold a whole frequency together for the whole mantid collective. We thought, if we can get that, we can begin to co-opt all of them, and there won't be any more problems with territorial disputes here. But I remember feeling that this wasn't built by the mantids. The mantids had been there long enough to call them native to Mars, but this was built by higher beings from, I don't know where, very advanced architecture that had a lot of light frequency, almost like going into a crystalline kind of structure, even though to our vision, it wouldn't appear that way, but to feel it experientially, it wasn't, I don't even have human language for it. It was opulent, it was beautiful. But we didn't realize that if we weren't of a certain frequency ourselves, we weren't told this, that we could also be killed by that frequency fence. So a lot of really interesting stuff with the mantids, and the mantids didn't want war with us. They were minding their own business, but to us at the time, we were trained to look at them as target practice. Yeah. Okay.
So what can you say about the plane that you were flying? I mean, are we talking about...
Yes, let's talk about that.
What kind of a thing was it?
I really, I questioned this memory because it kept coming back as this clunky old military helicopter that had been retrofitted for Mars. I'm like, is that insane or what? But now I think, knowing what we know about the early Germans and, military movement, it is possible. But I had a AI, a thing in my head that communicated with the craft. And if I was out in patrol, it was all my whereabouts, my location were always communicated to Central Command. So it wasn't like I could ever just, pilot myself away or leave. But the craft was pretty, I would say it was pretty junky.
So we're talking like a Chinook helicopter, something like that was just retrofitted for Mars?
It felt like that. It didn't feel like, a very high-tech thing. It was, I don't know if that's like all they had or what, if that was just the training mobiles, that they gave us, because our duties were not high on the list, let's say. We weren't like fighter pilots at the time. We were just kind of making sure things were good. So I piloted other much higher level craft when I was owned by the Draco farther out in the solar system. But the Mars craft was I remember crashing and being picked up by another group of reptilians, humanoid reptilians on Mars who were actually, I mean, kind of benevolent compared to everything else I'd experienced in the programs up to this point. Meeting them was like one of my high points. But I had crashed, and I don't actually know now, was I shot down by somebody? Don't know. But they picked me up and brought me back to where they live. And again, this was underground. It was pretty interesting. It's fascinating. They ended up, they wanted to know if they could use my technology in some way or my biology. This race had seemed to be regressed in some way through a cataclysm at some point on Mars. And they were regressed genetically because there were so few of them left. I lived with them for a while, and I think what happened when I crashed was that my connection back to Central Command was destroyed, and they didn't come after me. So eventually they cannibalized me for parts, and it ended I was cloned. It ended my tenure in that particular scenario, in that body.
So tell us about those indigenous Martian reptiles. I mean, what kind of philosophy did they have? What kind of technology did they use?
Oh, they were fascinating. They lived underground in a place that actually had water, vegetation. They had everything they needed underground. And my understanding too of this was that they didn't have craft or weaponry the way we think of high tech, but they had a very high tech spiritual relationship with the planet Mars itself. And through that, they were able to create, in the wake of this cataclysm, been able to create what they needed for food, water, light, a light source, they had a light down there, a brilliant light, a different kind of environment. It had what I could only call as some kind of tree, reminded me of a palm tree, but I don't really have language. I don't know what it was, big, tall stuff and like water running. And I remember eating with them some kind of green thing. And they had it was sort of like an indigenous community here on Earth, on our Earth, our planet, in that they had, I remember sitting in a circle while we were eating, and they had some kind of communication going on. It wasn't telepathic, and I couldn't communicate because they didn't seem to have telepathy, but there was a communal environment there, and it was very peaceable. It wasn't violent. It wasn't warlike. They minded their own business, and there were not very many of them left, but they meant me no harm. I always refer to them as the people who both saved me and stole me. In a way, they stole a valuable asset, but because they weren't that advanced, they didn't, like another race would have known how to get my tech and use it for something, or my biology, get something out of my DNA to help them. They didn't really know how. So it's interesting with the mantas and these reptoid beings that they're indigenous there. They didn't have, there's sort of anomaly in how we go about thinking about extraterrestrials with, again, like the weapons and the craft. That was outstanding in my memory because it was so different.
Yeah, I remember interviewing Randy Kramer back in 2015, and he described also being captured by these reptilians and living with them for a short period. He did.
I didn't know that. I've never listened to his whole testimony. Wow.
Yes. So he described something very similar to you, that they were very peaceful, very spiritual. They didn't really have high tech, relatively few of them. They really just kind of kept to themselves. They fought against the Draconians. And they were very territorial. So, and it was kind of something like the Last Samurai, a situation like that. So it sounds like what you went through was fairly analogous to that.
Wow, I had no idea. Thank you for that. Kind of a little bit of confirmation. Thank you. Yeah, it's I mean, if there's good memories in the programs, this is one of them, even though it didn't like end well for me there. There's almost this feeling of missing them. Like I've thought in the interim, like what happened to them? Did they make it? Are they still out there, or did they die out? I don't know.
Yeah, he also spoke of them in very positive terms, that there had been a kind of bond that had been created because they were a very noble species.
Yes. Wow. Yeah.
Now let's talk about the mantids on Mars. You'd already talked about them, but you describe an incident where you and a team of 7 encounter some of the mantids on Mars surface, and you're in these stealth suits, but yours malfunctions.
Oh yeah, this actually was with a spider, a giant spider. This wasn't the mantids. So yeah, we were out. Again, we were patrolling, and there were 7 of us in a unit, and we have the suits. And I know exactly what the suit was like because I know what Dean was wearing, and we had analog. You know, we wore the same thing. They're black suits with a little neck tight collar here, and they're so tricked out I couldn't even describe what all the tech is. But the suit had I would say cloaking technology now. At the time when this happened and the memory came in about this, there's a big spider coming down over the rise. And they just vaporized. They were gone. And my tech malfunctioned, and I was hit by some kind of energy weapon. It wasn't like it even broke my skin, but it was like frying something, almost like a burning inside, whether it was biology or tech that was burning, I'm not sure. But I remember being face down in the sand, and I was dead, but my consciousness, and remember, this is like clones of me, right? My consciousness was going somewhere, didn't know where to go. It's very anomalous. Like, where do I migrate back to? There was some moment of ambiguity, I would say, there of I'm gone, but I'm not gone. It's a curious memory. Yeah. So that was the spiders were, they're big, hairy, and smelly, like a deep brown, dark chocolate color. And in the memory, it feels like the thing is like as big as a house. I'm sure it's probably not true, but it feels so big and menacing because they're so much taller and quite like a bit frightening. So. Yeah.
So that was an incident where you were killed, and your consciousness transferred over to a cloned version of you that had been prepared. So, yeah, well, I mean, you kind of described a little bit about the process, that it was very difficult to explain, but somehow your consciousness knew to go to a clone as opposed to going into some kind of death cycle. Where, as we understand the death cycle, you leave the body, you go to source.
Yes, I love this question. Can I describe how that works? I think that's what we're getting at. I don't know that I can articulate exactly how it works, but it almost like there's a central, how is it, like a central body that it's going back to. There, like it's calling it back, almost like a signal or frequency calling it home. But the interim time is very kind of upsetting. I mean, it's emotional when I first recall this, and I mean, remembering yourself dying is not really. I don't know. I also think it's changed how I live my life. But as far as the cloning goes. I mean, there's different ways to build a clone. It depends what you want it for. Do you want it for just like light duty for a few days, or do you want it to be something that's going to stay around for a long time and be in heavy use? My impression, at least of one way that this is done, is through splitting, almost like having a blueprint of the etheric body. And my definition of the etheric body would be like the physical form of myself or you, anybody. The energetic form of my biology here. It's almost like a energy blueprint that contains all the physiological expression of me sitting here, just an energy format. Taking that, it's almost like a lattice of energy, and slowly building the biology around it. And that can take some time. But like I said, I'm not an expert on how clones are made, but I do think that is one way. And I think that Colonitech has evolved over time. And certainly, I mean, I feel like I was in this kind of dated version of the programs, and then what happened later in the 90s and on has been, things have come farther. Yeah.
Well, Tony Rodriguez, he explained how it worked in terms of when he was taken into the program at a certain age. I think he was taken, and that they created a cloned body. So they took his physical body, they cloned a version of him, and then transferred his consciousness into the cloned body.
Yeah.
And then he went off and did his thing. And I think that would kind of like give us an idea of how it would work, that if that cloned body, you're in that cloned body and that's killed, your consciousness wouldn't go back to prime source, but would go back to the original body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I assume that would probably happen as well for, if you create a clone of a clone, that the consciousness would go back to the last body it occupied until there's no more bodies, and then it would go back to creator source. So that's my best guess of how it would work.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's difficult to kind of articulate in 3D language these concepts or technologies that we don't necessarily have an analog for here on this planet. Not in popular conventional terms. Yeah.
Well, that seems to be how the ETs do it, though, and how the technology often responds, like advanced ET technology responds to not just the DNA that a person carries, but also the soul vibration.
Yes.
So if a soul is transferred from one body to another, that clone body would now have the soul frequency, and also the DNA frequency would be a match. And so if the body dies, then it goes back. So that's a complex process, but definitely it would make sense that you could move people from one clone body to another clone body, and they could die, but as long as you have enough clones, you could just keep sending them off onto missions. And that seems to have been what happened in your case. I know Tony Rodriguez and Randy Kramer, he said that there were many clones made of him, multiple clones, because he would die on missions and he would just pop straight back into a clone body.
Yeah, okay. It always sounds very bizarre when I talk about it. Like, as I'm hearing myself speak about being a clone and a cyborg, it's very strange, but it's good to have a little, corroboration for the weirdness. And it's true, I think, with the people who are most weaponized in the programs being what we call as super soldiers, we become a bit expendable. And because they put so much time, and it's a lot of resource expenditure into creating what I call a weaponized asset. And those assets can be traded. They're worth a lot, can be traded off to other groups. Yeah.
So you were eventually traded off to the Draconians. So that's interesting. So what was it that at some point in your 20 and back service, you got traded out and was used by the Draconians? So explain, how did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? Well, it was after the long process on Mars being built out into the highest level of what they were able to do with me, that they sold me to the Draco, who had this was all part of the galactic slave trade. And that was part of what was going on the moon, which I described, the cloning labs and all the experimental programs that had a lot to do with the slave trade, at least at the time. And likewise, the Draco were in control of I call it as Planet X. That's how it came back to my memory. I do make the distinction that I don't think that this was Nibiru. However, it's out just beyond like the Kuiper Belt, that far out, and a very large planet that they had as a place for the coming and going of cargo. And they were in control, the Draco were in control of a large portal, like a very powerful portal within that planet. And they my job, as I was owned by them, was just, it wasn't on the surface of the planet, but more protecting a large, huge Draco ship, mothership, in the atmosphere around the planet. And there were a bunch of us as pilots who would, fly out for our shift and just be, making sure the Draco ship was safe and who was coming and going. And I'm sure that I fought with what I'd call benevolent beings, and that's weighs upon me. I know I was controlled to do so, but yeah, again, the memories there are mostly of piloting and also being within the main mothership. And I wasn't piloting I was piloting a craft that was small, like a one-person thing. And it's very much, I describe, it's like the polar opposite of what I was piloting on Mars. This was like this, it kind of reminds me of like a manta ray, very elegant and living consciousness, almost like a living being that I interacted with through telepathy and through there's telekinetic qualities involved. It was all very natural, very easy. And I actually have some, I want to say good memories of being out there in space like that with this craft. And your craft is your craft. Nobody touches your craft. It's almost like how a human will be wed with this may be a poor analogy, but like a pet or a dog. They're so bonded to you. Like the craft is like, there's almost like this call and response psychic relationship with the craft. So almost like when I was out on patrol there, it was a respite from being in the presence of the field of the Draco, even though they're still in my mind, right? The Draco commands, let's say. But the Draco are the most fearsome beings I've ever laid eyes upon. And I would suggest always not making eye contact with them, because they will send you into a hell realm immediately. I mean, they'll send you into their gift of working with holographic technology is unparalleled. And they can read your mind it's like beyond reading your mind. It's beyond telepathy. And they were quite scary. Yeah. The Germans, I want to say too, because people might be saying, were the Germans out there? Occasionally I remember Germans visiting, but they were not, they were like bit players. I mean, wherever the Draco are, they are top dog without exception, as far as I've been able to tell in my experience. I don't exactly know what the Germans were doing other than observation and taking notes on what was going on, but the Draco were honchoing this whole thing. This was not really a human enterprise. It was far beyond that.
So how many Draco did you see in that Kuiper Belt base? And how did they communicate with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing is so big. I don't know. Again, it's like the Darkfleet base. I think I saw like need to know. I'm basically a slave. I mean, for all the built out technology, I don't have a need to know anything. Get in your ship and go patrol. Shoot anything that's out there. I don't need to know anything. So I interacted with not too many Draco, and a primary person that I interacted with was a hybrid that was part Draco. So as far as your question, let me see if I don't know that I can answer that accurately, like how many were actually in that whole big ship. A lot. There was a lot of going on there, because it seemed to be such a large a hub for slave trade. And the Draco have gotten rich. They've made an empire on trading, among other things. So I don't have a good number for you on that. My communion with them, because of my status was so pretty low. Like I didn't have a reason to be interacting with many of them. I was kept in a pretty tight rein. And the community, I think you asked about communication, was through commands that were just kind of sent directly, like to Skull. Yeah.
So when the Germans showed up, the Dark Fleet, I mean, what did they look like? I mean, did they have distinctive uniforms? About their craft? What do you remember?
They seem to have almost like this. I mean, I remember them as a bit, it's almost like the craft, as I described the Mars, like helicopter craft. there was a little retro feeling to them, as if they had retained something of where they left off in the 1940s. That's my memory of them. I never interacted with the Germans per se, but I remember them being around. And when they were around, there'd be like there was a little buzz, like, oh, there's some Germans here. I never remember them having like I said, I don't know what they were doing beside observation and taking notes on the situation. They obviously had a good working relationship with the Draco, but I don't know exactly their directive while they were there. I think they had to be very much under the thumb of the Draco.
Okay, so was there any other incident during your 20 and back from 1982 to 2002 that you recall that's significant and worth sharing?
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm sure there is. Yeah. What else could I give you guys today? Yeah. There is my mind keeps going back to that manted architecture underground, but there was another position that I filled at some point, and I remember clearly it was in a stage of my progression where I'm not anymore what we call a super soldier. I am out in these various different, I call them orbital substations. They're run with a skeleton crew, and they're observation outposts, again, in the outer reaches of the solar system. And those, I can't even call them a base because they're too small. They're like in the middle, they're obviously in the middle of nowhere. They're not on a planetary body or a star. They're in orbit. They're identifiable by a numerical value that has something to do with AU, astronomical units, which is the distance from the Earth to the sun, alphanumeric values, rather than having a name, Mars, whatever the planet is, Earth. There were no names. I think these places seem pretty numerous, and there were ways to just observe what was happening, even down to things as seemingly insignificant as atmospheric changes. But my impression there is that there had been a change in the programs and who was running them, what their objectives were, what their protocols were for dealing with people who were in the programs. And I always feel like this was almost like a benevolent assignment. And whenever I ask, like, who owned me out there? Who was I working for? I always hear the white hats. So I think that there was, I've still more to learn about this. We had a lot of downtime out there. It was almost like, I've described this almost as being like I don't know if you remember like old time fire lookouts where they'd be up in a post by themselves looking out at just looking for fires. Like we had a lot, there were just a few of us at each place, and we were looking to see if there were any anomalies, any passing other craft, who's out there, what are you doing? 99% of the time we had very little to do, it seemed, but this is still something that I'm working on figuring out greater context, because I'm no longer, it's almost like being given a desk job after all of this traumatic experience. I'm still looking into this and learning more about it, but maybe that rounds out a little bit of what I shared today.
Okay, so it's 2002. Now you're at that age, at 2002, by then you're around, I guess you would be 29.
30. Yeah, 30.
And so what happens? I mean, how do you go back to your 9-year-old body back in 1982?
Yeah, I don't actually remember the process of regressing back in. I mean, I remember leaving for that experience in the night, September, looking back at the house, my childhood home, has a bed light on in the kitchen, and I know I'm being taken out, and I know it's almost like happening in slow motion, and I know it's not going to go well for me, and I can't stop what's happening. But I don't have a memory of actually coming back into my body. I I have since had abduction experience or analogs of that show me what it might have been like, but not from that particular 9-year-old experience. So I'm not exactly sure. And I actually have no memory of the process of the memory wipe. I don't know. What I do know is that was my beginning of my 5th grade year, and I was MIA that whole year. I have no memories of 5th grade. I have no photos in my childhood photo album of that year. I don't know what happened. There's almost like this long length of amnesia after the fact. So I wish I could answer your question better. Yeah.
Very interesting, because that seemed to have been pretty much the same age and grade level as I recall. Tony Rodriguez was put into his 20 and back program. So it sounds very, very similar that they were plucking children out and putting them into these programs, and age, well, I guess, just putting them in and exposing them to various things. So
yeah, I think,
so
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, so in 1985, so this is 3 years after you've come back. Now you're doing pretty well. You sent me the California Achievement Test, where you scored in the upper 90s in many categories. So that showed that psychologically, you weren't impaired too much from this 20 and back program, which is the reverse of what happened to Tony Rodriguez, who described having regressed intellectually, emotionally, from being a precocious kid before being taken into the program to then coming out, just emotionally really devastated. But you seem to do
I would say that no, there was a long progression and a slow slide into being in a mental hospital for a while. I was not doing well emotionally, and after 5th grade, I remember in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, every year there was a teacher pulling me aside and saying, "Is everything okay at home?" And I would just sit there and cry mutely. So I would say that even though I was able to maybe ace those CAT scores, I mean, I was not well psychologically. I mean, I was in an abusive environment in my home life. And by the time I was 19, I had already tried to kill myself once. And hence I was in a facility to keep me from doing that. I was so depressed and so point blank fucked up that I didn't want to be here anymore. And I couldn't the thing is, I didn't consciously remember any of this. I couldn't put my finger on exactly why, other than, there's things in my earliest beginnings that were quite horrible that I did survive. We could point the finger there, but there was so much in me that I couldn't articulate to myself. I was highly dissociated, had no social life, and didn't know what the world would have for me, or I couldn't find any meaning in it. So maybe giving a little bigger picture there of that area of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, that was important, because I know in Tony's case, it impacted him across the board, but it seemed that as far as intellectually, your abilities stayed pretty sharp. And your intuitive abilities also stayed pretty sharp, because I know you've worked professionally. You sent me some testimonials from people about your intuitive gifts. So it seems that whatever it was that you kept from that program, one of those gifts was the intuitive.
Yeah. Well, over time, I mean, I lost that for a long time. I mean, I was a very lost soul for a long time, and that the intuitive ability didn't really come back fully until I was again into my 40s. So within the last 10 years, and I'm grateful for that. I mean, I've worked really hard to get well, get better from everything that's happened. I mean, my life was a wreck for a long time, and it's amazing to me that I'm able to. I mean, I never thought I'd be publicly speaking about any of this. And in fact, I never, years ago, I never would have even thought twice about ETs, non-terrestrial life being a thing. So I've made a huge journey with so many of my own belief systems and ways that I've used to cope with the world, my trauma, and got on a real spiritual path at around age 40 again, and that really helped save my life. So it's been so I'm sure for all the people who've been in the programs in some manifestation or other, we've had a challenging road.
It does sound like you've been through something very, very challenging and difficult. But it seems you've come out of it with your memories coming back, and you're able to kind of like piece together some of the more significant aspects of it. So what do you say to people who are maybe still kind of like skeptical or sitting on the fence about the whole secret space program genre?
Yeah, totally.
What would you say to them?
Yeah, what do we say to them? I totally get it. I didn't believe, this stuff is so, it's normal to not believe this. Look at what we're talking about, cyborgs and clones and other beings in the outer part of the solar system and slave trade. It's insane. It's totally insane. What would I say to them? Thank you for being open and minded enough to listen to this. Yeah, I know it's hard. It doesn't make sense to the linear mind, but also I'd say if you can look at it from a more multidimensional perspective and a more quantum perspective and a perspective that isn't so like centered on Terra and humans, that it might begin to make more sense. But I do appreciate anybody who watches this and is even the slightest bit open to this possibility in our solar system and beyond our solar system.
So what's next for you in terms of this information? Is it about getting more memories of what happened? Is it about getting some kind of justice for what happened? What's your next step?
There's always cosmic justice. This is a beautiful question. Give me a moment with this. Continuing to speak on this because I think, I have an imperative to reveal what happened. I think is become well enough to speak in a pretty stabilized way about my experiences. I feel like there is a higher directive, like, okay, now, don't just keep it to yourself. You have to be part of how this is becoming public. So there is that. I do have a mission, a small mission around that, and getting more memories back, of course, continuing to listen in to whatever might be revealed naturally through my deeper meditation. And I want to understand, there's so much that happened that I probably don't, for being out there as long as I was, there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot I do know, enough to have, like you said, some key features here, but I will be excavating the story until I'm old and gray and leaving this body, and I thought when I first contemplated like coming out about this, I'm like, are you crazy? Number one, there's, are you crazy? That always comes up. And also like, you don't know everything. I always say to my interviewers, this isn't all tidied up in a package that's complete with a nice little bow. It's going to be, more and more keeps coming, and more of my contextual understanding, more sophisticated understanding of what happened and why continues to grow. So that is part of my personal process. And I would say, as I've shared about, like, I was really a mess for years and using different, addictions to help me cope with my life. I've become so well, and this is part of that. Like it's almost counterintuitive that how would me beginning to speak of this 2.5 years ago after my father died, starting to go public with this, how would that make my life better? Because I lost a lot of friends. There's people who think I'm nuts, but somehow it brought me back into a place of empowerment in my life. I never thought that this would happen, that it would be the thing that brought me home. So for people out there who might be struggling with their own memories, I'd say it's only going to get better. Like, don't shut the gate because it's too scary to remember.
No, one of the things that you started doing after some accident in 2012 was beginning a spiritual practice, and that seemed to be critical in you regaining the memories and integrating them without getting too much trauma. So can you maybe speak about how important it is to have a spiritual
Yes.
practice.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, I was hit by a car on a training ride. I was on my road bike in northern New Mexico, of all places, and I was hit by a car. And that's when things I feel like at that moment when I was hit, it blew open something in my brain where memories were contained. And even though I didn't see everything in a great flood, something shifted. I had horrible PTSD. And long story short, I was really backed into a corner at that point and thought, I just need to sit down and begin a meditation practice and get back in relationship with myself in the wider cosmos. I don't know if I used that word at the time. And that changed my life. Without that, I wouldn't be sitting here. So the importance of spiritual development, like the answers are inside. Everything we need for the journey is within us. It's not out there somewhere. That's why we are such majestic creatures. And that's why so many races want us. There's so much that as yet remains untapped, I think, in each of our individual consciousness fields and in our collective. I mean, that's what I think we're all doing is in this movement of disclosure, is trying to move ourselves back into that greatness.
So do you have a website? Do you have a place where people can visit to learn more about you, or if they want to contact you?
Yeah, it's just RebeccaRoseBarfoot.com. And I also have a YouTube channel, Sirius Blue, Rebecca Rose on YouTube, where people can get a lot more detail about everything I've spoken about here today.
Well, I want to thank you, Rebecca, for coming forward and for your courage in digging up these very difficult memories and being able to share them, even though there is a lot of skepticism that's still out there. So
sure.
I want to honor your courage in doing that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.